All right, welcome back. We're into Unit 4, Day 14. We're going to finish up Latin America today. So, reminders, make sure you have your history notebook out and take your notes as you move through the video. And make sure you complete the vocabulary for this video, either highlighting your notes or at the start of it. So, let's go ahead and get started. So, our charts for today are going to be Batista, Fidel Castro, Bay of Pigs, Liberation Theology, Cuban Missile Crisis, Hyperinflation, Cartels, and Pentecostal Christianity. So, we're talking about Cuban communism in the postmodern world, and then we're going to talk about social changes in Latin America post World War II. So let's talk about the Cuban Revolution. So when Cuba was given or became independent after the uh, Spanish American War, right? The 1906 Platt Amendment basically made Cuba a protectorate. So that means the Americans had free reign to invade whenever they felt threatened by Cuba's government. Right. Well, from 1936 to 1944, a gentleman by the name of Batista ruled Cuba, and he was largely sympathetic and worked with the United States. And then we have the rise of Fidel Castro, and Fidel Castro was a young, idealistic leader who was in opposition to Batista, had actually been exiled from Cuba for his views, and in 1956. Castro and his supporters are going to invade Cuba. And after 2 years of guerrilla resistance, they successfully are going to oust the Batista government and come to power under a socialist Marxist state, complete with centralized economic planning, very much in line with the USSR, and really, you know, trying to become that kind of Marxist communist state. Now, the United States will sever ties in 1961, and Cuba will become increasingly dependent on the USSR. The United States, not wanting communism that close to its doorstep and the idea of containment, is going to train Cuban exiles from Florida to invade Cuba to try to oust Castro's government. This is going to cause the USSR to turn for Cuba to turn to the USSR for military aid. The U.S. will then blockade the island to get Soviet missiles removed, leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is going to get the Cuban missiles out of Cuba, to get the Russian missiles out of Cuba, and get the United States missiles out of Turkey. And social reforms under Castro were extensive. Yes, they did help, but they were also at the expense of individual liberties. So, better things, less freedom. Right? And this kind of becomes kind of a theme that kind of runs throughout Latin America with the search for reform. Right? Many of these Latin American countries are tired of the stagnation, tired of the United States involvement, tired of outside involvement. And this turns to the military option, and military governments become very prevalent in Latin America due to the stability that the military brings. We also have the search for political stability through single party rule, such as the LPRI in Mexico or El PRI in Mexico. But we also have the rise of Christian democratic parties. This becomes prevalent in Chile and Venezuela. With the increasing roles of the church, instability in government, people tend to turn toward more conservative church values. And some priests are going to blend theology and Marxism to create a new type of ideology known as liberation theology. And liberation theology is again a mixture of Christianity and Marxism, kind of the belief that, hey, Jesus was a Marxist, so we should follow this, right? This kind of starts to get some traction, but doesn't really stay around or go anywhere, right? But by the 1980s, militaries began to restore civilian governments due to kind of the changing world nature. So with Detente and the fall of the Soviet Union, right? They tend to restore more civilian governments. Now, the problem is economic stability in Latin America tends to be a major problem. Foreign debt, as countries borrowed heavily from the United States and other places in the world to finance these reforms. We also have superinflation or hyperinflation, where their money, they print more money to try to do stuff, and it just causes massive inflation. We have low standards of living and increased levels of criminal activity, often associated with the drug trade. Women was at the beginning was very slow change for women. Gender equality was always a goal more than a reality in Latin American and even Latin American revolutions. And in most Latin American nations, women did not even receive the right to vote until the 1940s and 50s. But just before World War I, women began to enter the industrial labor force more and more. And by the 1990s, there's tons and tons of women in power, and there are more women elected in offices, including presidencies, than pretty much anywhere on the planet except Scandinavia. So women have gone from not being able to vote and not even in power to a complete shift where they are the most women in power for anywhere in the world, especially more than the United States. Now, after 1950, the Latin American population will rapidly grow due to people moving around Latin America, moving to Latin America, population growth due to increased industrialization, high standard of living. There will be massive migrations from other parts of Latin America to Mexico due to Mexico's higher standard of living during the Mexican Miracle. And we just have this massive search for change, and people move around to find that change. Right? Another big thing is moving out of Latin America to places that have massive amounts of jobs and economic advantages, such as the United States, such as places like South Africa or parts of Western Africa or even Europe. And jobs for illegal immigrants from Latin America working in the U.S. are a source of financial money. So you go to these places, you work, and you send a portion of your money back home. And this does generate a lot of money, right, in the economy, and does actually help with the inflation issue. But this also does breed a reliance for foreign currencies in their market, which may cause a decrease in the value of your own money. Right? We also, again, massive population booms, and again, massive immigration for work into other countries for that higher standard of living. Right? Now, culturally, we have a reflection of a lot of change, a lot of death, a lot of revolutions, and kind of this hope and despair kind of mirroring, right? Latin America does change its religious scene while Catholicism does remain the prominent religion. We do have the rise of Pentecostal Christianity, and Pentecostal Christianity is it's similar Christianity, but they believe that you could be born again, right? So you can, repent and be born again. They also have speaking in tongues. There's a lot of rituals in Pentecostal Christianity. While it nowhere near rivals Catholics, they are on the rising trend. Right? Now we have the drug trade. Now, the drug trade in recent years, especially in the 80s into the modern day, from the 1980s into the modern day, we have a massive drug production that takes place in Latin America. We have some major fields in Colombia and Bolivia, and then we also have major refinements in Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru. The issue is that for many native populations, this is a cash crop that's easily to produce and easy to sell, thus allowing their populations to have economy. It's also easy to trade, easy to sell for everyday workers. So it becomes a very quick way to make money. We also have the rise of cartels in politics. Now, different places fight them differently. Colombia will fight bitterly to stop the drug trade. Bolivia will often cooperate with the cartels because it benefits the economy, right? Mexico is racked with civil violence and civil unrest and clashes between the government and the Mexican cartels. Venezuela and Cuba are often involved in traffic because it's a stop-off point, refueling, things like that. Right? The reality is that many Many of these cartels, many of the drug trades are now controlled by the Mexican cartels. And many of the other states are there to help launder money and help with the cartels because it is a massive source of money and revenue. Now, the U.S. intervention in the region is often tied to fighting the drug trade. We have massive drug task forces like the DEA, the Coast Guard. They're all about this kind of fighting this drug trafficking. We have an increase in the modern day of opioid epidemics and the increase of the kind of fighting the drugs in the 80s and 90s. We have the war on drugs, right? And it's one reason that the U.S. still kind of tolerates kind of generals in charge of Latin American countries as long as they're help fighting the drug trade. So that's all I have for you today for Latin America in the 20th century. We're gonna start on some new topics starting the next day. Thank you guys, and I'll see you guys.